Okay, hi there, Facebook. Hopefully, I'm coming out live. I'll just give it a moment to see if, whilst the internet gets working, I think I should be live and put this up. Okay. All right, good. I think I'm coming out live. All right. So, alive today to talk about punishment, and it's funny who's messaged me when I said I was talking about this, but that's a whole nother conversation. But I thought it's something that is very, very important to have a candid conversation about, and to discuss punishment. Is it appropriate? Isn't it appropriate? Should it be used? Shouldn't it be used? And have that discussion. So obviously tonight, those of you that have shown interest in relabeling reactivity, my online course, it is closing tonight to midnight. So if you are interested, just go to www.relabelingreactivity.co.uk and you can sign up. So thank you for those that have already signed up and those that have upgraded their membership. It's great to have people show interest in the project, which has been a real labour of love to put together, and the people that have contributed to it have been absolutely fantastic to work with. Lou Holmes, the nosework expert, Christina Ashley from the States, talking about the mental health welfare aspect and the impact when you have a dog with behavioural challenges. Kat Farrance, owner and CEO of Movement for Modern Life, who also contributed about ways in which we can work on ourselves, etc. There's been other people that have been contributed since, for those of you that signed up for the Relabeling Reactivity Collective. And if you are interested in subscribing to that access, just go to the website, select the VIP option, and you'll become a part of a Facebook group where you can ask questions and receive additional content. So just a little bit of information there. As I said, the agenda from the course has always been to help people, and to help people in a way that is effective, that is timely, and is clear and simple to follow. It's not about having to be a vastly experienced dog trainer with an infinite amount of knowledge. Anybody can follow the processes and the plans and the training plans in that on the course to help overcome the challenges that you might be facing. So I wanted to talk about the often unspoken word of punishment, certainly for trainers like myself who are a reinforcement-based dog trainer. So by definition, that means my choice of training is always to find ways to reward my dogs, or, excuse me, I'm going to sit up a bit, find ways to create reinforcement opportunities for my dogs, as opposed to using aversives or compulsion to train my dogs. And this isn't a discussion about and to beat anybody else over the head with a stick or judge people for the way in which they train. It's just to explain some thoughts about punishment. I'm going to talk about it in a somewhat simplistic manner, because often the topic of conversation can get very muddied when you use scientific terms. So, the technical definition of reinforcement, the technical definition of punishment, the technical definition of positive and negative, can sometimes grey the points being made. So as a trainer, I choose not to use aversives when I train my dogs. But do I punish my dogs when I train them? Yes, I do. And in the strictest terms of punishment, by definition, by scientific definition, I absolutely will punish them for things that they don't do. Rather than trying to explain it in terms of the scientific explanation or the terminology, that I will explain in layman's terms what I do with my dogs when they don't do as I want them to do. So when I choose to train my dogs for sports, I'm going to just move and sit up in the chair. I use reinforcement. So I reward my dogs profusely for behaviours that I want them to do. And the consequence of them not doing the behaviour that I want is I don't reward them. So, or I withhold the reward, or I take the reward away. So that's the punishment, or the consequence, shall I say, for them not doing as I've asked them to do. And my preference would be to then look at the problem, the behaviour from the dog's perspective, and ask myself certain questions. Have I made it too difficult for the dog? Does the dog understand? Have I provided sufficient motivation? And I almost go through this dialogue with myself to deduce whether my withholding the reward as a consequence was appropriate. If I feel that it isn't, then I will go back and I will obviously deal with whatever issue that I've identified. For example, breaking the behaviour down, making it easier for the dog, reducing the distractions, providing us a bigger reward, and so forth and so forth. So that the consequence of my dog not doing a behaviour is I won't reinforce them, and then I will form a plan to help the dog understand. And when we specifically talk about sports, for me, I choose not to use aversives to train them, or force to train them, because I believe that dog sports are primarily done for my leisure, or my pleasure, I should say, and my gain and my ego, largely, if we're being really super truthful. So for me, from my own personal perspective, and it's not about, this conversation is not to judge people for how they train their dogs, but to give an explanation of the principles and philosophies that are outlined in relabeling reactivity. So as a trainer, I choose not to use force to train my dogs. You could go down the argument of what is force. Is my collar and lead being on the dog being forceful? Is the use of a head collar forceful? Is the use of a harness forceful? And so forth and so forth. But I'm going to keep the conversation relatively simple so people can understand. So I choose not to use pain or force, which we used to do at one point when I first started dog training. Say, for example, teach a dog a competition retrieve. It was very standard practice to use force to teach the dog to pick up an article. So there would be various methods that would be used, which would all have a level of discomfort or pain to train the dog to hold the dumbbell. I choose not to do that with my dogs now. As I said, because largely I'm doing this for my own gains and my ego. And when you know better, you do better. So, but the question that when you're talking specifically about behavioural issues and challenges, specifically issues that can be labelled as reactive, people are always concerned of, well, what do I do if my dog does? And there's a blank space and you can fill in the blank. So what do I do if my dog chases another dog? What do I do if my dog bites another dog? What if my dog lunges at another dog? So in those instances, we need to define clearly what is punishment is what is just stopping reinforcement. So in those instances, the first thing you want to do is be a responsible party in that situation. So what will define or decide my course of action will be the situation that I'm in. So if I'm in a situation where my dog, myself, or another party, person, dog, etc., is in imminent danger or there's a threat towards them, my responsibility is to stop the dog rehearsing that behaviour. And that might be pick the dog up, put it in my vehicle, grab the dog's collar, move it away, do whatever I need to do in that moment to stop the dog rehearsing that behaviour. That is not dog training. That is conflict resolution, for want of a better term. So in the instance where my dog lunges at another dog, and the dog, a classic example, you're out walking a dog, somebody's dog runs up to yours, they say all the infamous phrase that leaves us all with a shudder down our spine, is he's only friendly and he only wants to say hello. My dog lunges at that dog. My course of action in that moment is not to get in a dialogue with the person, it's just to grab my dog's collar and take it to a safe space, back in my vehicle if appropriate, or position the dog in a way that it can't cause any damage to the other dog. Hopefully by that point the owner will collect their dog or whatever the case may be, and I can then formulate a plan. Okay, in that moment there is no dog training per se taking place. I'm merely avoiding something untoward happening. So in that instance, could the collar grab and drawing the dog away be deemed as punishment, or could it be punitive? It really, in that instance, in that situation, it doesn't really matter. Okay, don't bog yourself down with doing the right thing or the wrong thing in terms of dog training. Do the right thing or wrong thing in terms of let's keep our dog safe, let's keep yourself safe, let's keep the other person safe, and keep the other dog safe. Okay, so once that has been done, I've removed my dog from that situation as best as I can within the moment. I now need to form a training plan. And the training plan will identify, hopefully, the core root of the issue with the dog. Why is the dog lunging? Why is the dog showing aggression or fear or apprehension towards the thing? Okay, the thing could be people, dogs, etc. And ideally, what I'll be doing is, like you would, if I consider that, if we substitute dog, person, horse, cattle, whatever, and that triggers the dog behaviour, as we substitute that for distraction, Okay, my job is to minimize the distractions so that my dog can be successful. And therefore, what I will do is build an understanding of what I do want in the face of that distraction via the means of using reinforcement. So that means initially moving my dog further away, where the dog can cope in that to that distance. So, for example, if my dog is aggressive or reactive towards other dogs, I'm going to have my dog positioned so far away from another dog that it is unlikely to behave inappropriately, and I'm going to counter condition and build up a history of what I do want. I'm going to explain to the dog, I really like it when you look at the other dog and then disconnect and sniff the ground. I really like it when you look at the other dog and don't bark. That's brilliant. I really like it when you look at the other dog and look away, and so forth and so forth. Okay, so that's the first stage. Okay, once you first and foremost need to explain to the dog what is it that you don't want. And when people come to me for help with their behavioral challenges or behavioral cases, they always want to have the dog behave inappropriately so I can see the dog at its worst. I don't need to see the dog at its worst to understand the problem. If the dog is anxious, and if the dog is lacking confidence, then adding punishment to that is going to be fraught with problems. So if you think of it logically, and we say, for example, I need the dog to understand how to deal with that situation. So if we took this to say, we paralleled this with children, and if I said to my child, what's 2 plus 2? And they said 5, and I smacked them around the head. And then what's 2 plus 2? And they said 3, and I whacked them around the head. And then what's 2 plus 2? And they say 4, and I give them a treat. Their experience or their response or their feeling towards me and learning is going to be soured. So it would be far better to explain to them 2 plus 2, let's count them up. Okay, 4, excellent. If they make a mistake, I'm going to initially ignore the mistake and let them try again, and so forth and so forth. So using that principle and that approach, what we are doing is communicating to our learner, which in this case is the dog. We're educating them about what is it that we want you to do in the face of dogs? What is it that we want you to do in the face of distractions? What is it that we want you to do in the face of X, Y, and Z? Now, if the dog is a dog that is apprehensive, anxious, and fearful, we need to be thinking about taking that dog into situations where we can build confidence. We want to layer the dog's experiences so that they're going out and succeeding in different environments, and we're building confidence. And so we might do, for example, shaping games where the dog might have a bit of problem solving, and the dog has to, furrow its eyebrow and work out what it is that we want, and eventually succeed and get rewarded for it. So that builds the dog's confidence and self-esteem, for want of a better term, that they succeeded. If the dog is concerned about noises or movement, then let's try and do that minimally and build up confidence around those things. So we can split the causes of reactive behavior down to very specific things. Scary objects, noises, sounds, motion. We can split that down and teach our dogs, rather than telling them what we don't want, we can focus on what we do want. Okay, so once we've formulated a plan of how to, first we've identified what the cause is, the distraction, then we've worked on minimizing it or splitting it down so the dog understands all the various bits. We want to teach our dog skills and give the dog education of if I know what you want me to do in any given situation. We're going to test it. We're going to see if we can almost cause some error. Often in dog training, people are dubious about letting their dog make mistakes, and I have my own thinking about why that is. But the dog making a mistake doesn't have to instantly mean that the dog is a bad dog. The dog is learning. The dog is working out. Oh, that was a dead end. That didn't get me anything, but that option did. So we want the dog to, by almost somewhat of a trial and error, and we're only going to give them a few choices. So, for example, the dog is in a sit, and I put food in front of the dog, and the dog chooses to break, and I block the dog getting to the food. So the dog's going to make a decision. Well, I really want the food, but getting out of the position doesn't get me that. But if I remain in the position, there's a possibility that the food will come to me. That's a very simplified way of explaining how, by trial and error, the dog is working out what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And what I will then do is I'll see if I can come up with ways of challenging them and testing them. Can I throw the food? Can I move the food? Can I drag the food? Can I try and tease them out? Can I make a little funny noise? Can I put more food down? How well can I challenge the dog, and how many ways can I challenge the dog to to test if the dog really understands that sitting means you must sit there and stay there irrespective of the distraction, okay? Now, if the dog does make a mistake, the consequence, okay, of that is I just don't let them get the reward, okay? Now, in the instance, if we take this back to the dog behaving, the dog like going for a treat is one thing, but the dog trying to bite another dog is a totally different ballgame. So ideally what we should do is set the dog up so far away from the distraction that it's less likely to make an inappropriate choice. And if we do our training systematically and gradually go closer to the distraction and gradually increase the challenges, the idea being is that the dog is building up more rewards, or more understanding of what we want, as opposed to rehearsing what we don't want, okay? So you've done all this stuff, and the day comes where the dog, you've done all your layers appropriately and the dog still behaves inappropriately. So you've told the dog to sit, and somebody's dog runs past the dog and the dog gets out of the position. So the consequence of the actions for my dogs would be I just put my hand on the collar and bring it back and let go of the collar and allow the dog to make a choice. Do you want to go lunge at the other dog, or do you want to sit? The dog will probably initially lunge for the dog. I will just bring it back further. So I'm reducing the challenge, and I'm asking the dog a question. Do you understand that word? If the dog consistently fails, it's telling me that I've progressed too quickly, in which case I would again abort the plan. I would take the dog away and I would do some more, break it down further. If I've done my groundwork correctly, the dog should go, oh, sorry, my bad. I should be doing the sit, which allows me to then reward the dog. In that instance, I'm no longer concerning myself with the dog being drawn by the distraction. What I'm doing is saying to the dog, I'm concerned about your sitting. Sitting brings good things to you. If you choose not to sit because there's a draw of another dog or there's motion, etc., the consequence is you don't get rewarded, and I can play around with the distance to decrease the level of distraction. All right. So the fallout for punishment, why often people still ask the question of, well, what would you do if? And I'm being hopefully as transparent as possible. I always, when you're talking about punishment, and what you are willing to do and what is appropriate, my offering in that discussion is, well, if you either had a video on you, a video, which obviously I video a lot, and I do things live quite frequently with dogs, if I had somebody watching me, or would I be willing to do this to a young child? So if I had Neve with me, would I be willing to implement this punishment or this correction with her in a public space? Okay. Now, if that makes you then question what you're doing, that to me would probably articulate why I wouldn't choose that as a course of action. Okay. Now, the thing to say about dogs with behavioural challenges, often people get exasperated. They have a moment where they, get frustrated, get exasperated, do something that in retrospect they regard. My offering to people of that, if they've done that, is go easy on yourself. Yeah, you are a human being. Most people are trying to do the best they can with what they've got, and don't beat yourself up for making a split-second impulsive reaction to your dog's behaviour when you may feel a little bit stressed and panicked, etc. However, the takeaway is to take stock of what caused that to happen and altering the setup, the environment, so that you can succeed and therefore the dog can succeed. For me, to say that punishment, okay, or using a correction doesn't work would be a lie. But the effective use of a punishment or a correction needs to be contingent on so many factors. It needs to be the timing, it needs to be the criteria, it needs, again, all good dog training, it needs to be animal training, it needs to be the severity and the execution at that perfect moment, and it needs to be the sun, the stars, the moon all align at exactly the right moment, at the exact amount of the level of intensity to justify or for the dog to instantly learn, bang, don't that consequence or that aversive punishment, etc., was because of whatever it was that I was doing in that moment. there is so many variables that could affect that being miscommunicated that it often is fraught with more loss than gain. Yeah, so you're going to lose more than you're going to gain if by correcting a dog, because mostly people don't do it effectively, they don't do it timely, they don't do it appropriately, and there is also fallout. So hypothetically, let's talk about let's using an aversive. So I decide I'm going to use a big stick and I'm going to hit my dog over the head when it lunges at another dog. But in that moment, and everything else, the sun, the moon, the stars all align, and the dog lunges, and I get my stick and I time it brilliantly, and I hit the dog on the head absolutely perfectly at that given moment, and the dog goes, "Oh, right, that stick going on my head was directly related to me lunging at the dog." So the likelihood of the dog lunging at another dog would probably not happen. But if we break it down, would I need to always carry that stick with me? Did the dog understand that it was its behaviour, or was it the stick that caused the punishment? I don't know. Has the dog now going to learn have a real aversion to sticks? Will that then generalise to people with walking sticks or with crutches, or a broomstick when you're sweeping or mopping up in the house? Is your dog going to run away from those things? Is that going to cause the dog to be anxious? Is the dog going to be suspicious with somebody coming towards them if they have a walking stick? So it's all very well saying, right, okay, we're going to use punishment. We're planning the day. We're going to hit the dog with a big stick, and we're going to sort this problem out. The fallout from that can often not be seen in the moment. It can happen somewhere else, and it might be in the most inappropriate manner. So, for example, you're post-lockdown, you have your relatives round, one of them turns up with a walking stick and your dog bolts or has an absolute breakdown because of the person with a walking stick. So whilst it might have had the desired effect in the moment, we have to think holistically about our dog and their behaviour to see where else it can affect the dog, and whether that warrants and justifies the dog's health and our happiness and the relationship that we want to have with our dog. Now, as I said, would it work? Did it stop the behaviour? More than likely, but we have to balance that with the fallout from punishment. So in terms of my perspective on dog training, my preference is to find a way to make the dog be successful, to get the dog to be right. If that means moving away from the distraction, working further away from it, etc., then that's my preference of my approach. That isn't to say that, and this is where a lot of approaches to reactivity or behavioural issues can be ineffective, is they're so reliant on creating the perfect environment, the perfect situation, the perfect setup for the dog to learn. As a professional dog trainer, that is very possible for me. I can create the perfect instance for the dog to experience the right thing at the right time. But also, I take the dogs that I train and I work with out in the real world, into situations where there's people around, where I can't control all the moving parts. In those instances, I can focus on creating distance, going to the quiet part of the park, monitoring the things moving around the dog, not leaving the dog in that environment for too long. So what I'm doing is not then becoming a recluse with the dog, and forming this really long list of management techniques that I have to employ. And I'm actually starting to decrease that list and making it more that my dog can cope in those environments. And the dog not only can cope, but the dog understands what I would prefer them to do. And also, long term, the dog gain confidence in those environments where they become so buoyant, so clear that they can be around people, dogs, etc., and be very comfortable and confident. What you want from your dog's behaviour is there's going to be things that would be absolutely a red light to your dog. Your dog is going to absolutely have things that are going to cause it to have a red light. Stop, danger, danger, danger. I don't want to be go near that thing. And our goal is to make those things more neutral. So going to the amber zone and then eventually agreeing where the dog is comfortable and happy to be around those things. It is very realistic to have things that your dog may never, ever, ever totally go in the green column, but they may constantly relive in the amber. And occasionally they might go back to being red. But if the dog has the majority of behaviours in the amber column, that's fantastic. If we can get them to become green, even more so. But realistically, amber's fine. Where the dog is neutral, it's absolutely indifferent. It's not his favourite thing. It's not going to choose to go up to people. It's not going to choose to go up to other dogs, but I'm happy to exist in the world where those things are present, and the dog can function, and it can be responsive, and it can listen, and it can operate, or to be operant, I should say, in those environments. So that's the goal, to have a dog that can remain in that amber if the dog has an extreme response. So in terms of what is appropriate punishment, for my dogs, the punishment that they receive is they don't get reinforcement. They get the thing that they want withheld, and they have another opportunity to try again. If the dog consistently fails at something and I am not rewarding it, that tells me there is something the dog doesn't truly understand. And the earnest responsibility and clarification comes back on my shoulders to communicate to the dog, what is it that I want of them, and how do they receive that reinforcement? What is it the dog has to do? And that's down to reducing the distractions, again, making it clearer, even breaking it down. And the thing to say is all dogs will learn, or dogs often learn very differently. Some dogs are very literal. Some dogs are brilliant at filling in the gaps. Other dogs take longer to acquire information. It's really important that we look at it constantly from the dog's perspective. In terms of what is appropriate punishment what is appropriate to do, what is appropriate to do in a situation where something happens, dog turns up, runs into your dog's space, you caught off guard, just stop the dog rehearsing the inappropriate behaviour. Pick it up, grab its collar, move it away, do whatever you need to do in that moment to stop anything escalating. And it might not be, it doesn't have to be anything, confrontational. It doesn't have to be anything violent. It doesn't have to be anything aggressive. So if a dog ran up to my dog and I didn't want it to, I might, if the dog was appropriate, if it was possible, I would pick the dog up, move it away, or just put a treat on the dog's nose and guide it away if the dog was food motivated. Or if appropriate, pick it up, put it in my vehicle. Or if it was near a fence, I'd walk out the fence and shut the fence behind me. There's a load of things that I would be doing to help me in that situation. That also is reliant on me always having some sort of plan of action. So if, I would take my dog that if it had confidence issues or reactivity issues, I would initially exercise it or only put the dog in situations where I could have a strategy. If a dog suddenly turned up from that corner, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. If the dog comes from that point, I can do and I have a plan of action. So it's really important that we think about that, and we're selective about where we train our dogs and where we walk them, so that we can have a plan of action, so that we keep the dog safe, we keep ourselves safe, we keep other people safe, etc. And we're not, more importantly, having the dog learn that behavior is going to work for them. And when I say the behavior works for them, so the dog that lunges, it's important that our dog doesn't keep lunging at other dogs and those other dogs move away, because the dog's learning that gets them what they want. If they're scared, they lunge, the dog moves away, the dog's going to figure out that that's a great course of action. The more I lunge, the dog will move away, and we don't want the dog to rehearse that. We want the dog to understand that lunging isn't appropriate in those situations. But if lunging isn't appropriate, we need to work on the core reason why the dog is lunging. It might be fear, it might be previous experience. So it might be a case of socializing the dog or getting the dog around dogs that cause them concern and building confidence, and so forth and so forth. All right. So just a quick little discussion there about punishment. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'm just going to have a look on... let's have a look and see if anybody has questions to ask about punishment. Don't need to see a child drowning in order for them to receive swimming lessons. Absolutely, yeah, good one. I say to people who just subversive that you can't get my timing right with a clicker, I'm never going to manage with... Oh, hang on. Why won't that let me read that? Sorry, I'm just going to go into my laptop and read the comments. Okay, let's have a look. So... people just... Okay, Jennifer said... I say to people who suggest aversives is that I can't get my time right with a clicker. I'm never going to... Oh, hang on. Lost it. Let me have a look. Why won't that let me read that? Oh yeah, I'm never going to manage with an e-collar prong. Yeah, absolutely. I think so. The thing about timing is every single one of us, our timing is going to deteriorate, fluctuate when we are tired, when we're when if I've had too much caffeine. I know from a competing point of view, I don't have caffeine. I've realised now I don't have caffeine before I compete because I get an adrenaline buzz. So me having caffeine on top of that makes me way too edgy. Just a simple little thing like that. So I tend to have water water before I compete, and then once I've competed, then and anybody that knows me knows that I drink a lot of coffee. So I stay away from. So that can affect your timing. Yeah, it definitely makes me way too edgy. So if that was a trainer that used, something that could cause my dog discomfort, that's going to affect my timing and my ability to do it in a neutral, non-emotive manner. Yeah. Okay, let's have a look. My border collie got stuck at the sighting players. I'm just going to have a look at this. Oh. Okay, so Susan's point was about the dog that does the hard stare at other things. So that's really typical of herding breeds. I tend to use that to my gains, and I channel that dog's energy into me. So often it's motion based. So if I have a dog that's really motion focused, which all my border collies are, especially from that related to fire, I utilize that desire to fixate on things for my games. It's how I get them very focused on me. So lots of motion-based games, recall games, etc., to get the dog very focused. Actually, I did a lesson with one of her puppies this morning who loves to chase birds, and we did some work on his recall in a safe space because he had learnt that chasing birds was a very fun thing. So it is absolutely resolvable. It just needs that little bit of work, really. Okay, how do you build confidence? Oh, hang on a second, Jane, I want to read that. How do you build confidence around noise in a dog that has become scared of certain noises more recently? She has a vet check and they can find nothing wrong. So, Gemma, on that point, one thing is I would actually go back to the vet and get them to check for thyroid. So actually, I think Susan Garrett did a recent podcast about exactly this thyroid. And if you were referred to her podcast, it's dogsthat.com. She did a really great podcast on thyroid issues and how that can often, but it does take a little bit of digging. The standard she had the standard thyroid check doesn't. Just go back and have a look at that podcast, Gemma, just simply because I know that often the standard thing won't pick up the specifics. Don't quote me on it. But have another look at that. And she did it, I think it was recently. And I know somebody will probably pick it up. The 4-panel one. Yeah, I think it is that. Okay, so if the dog is if the dog is showing fear towards the other thing is I don't know the dog's breed, etc. Is I've known dogs that have got very noise sensitive and their hearing's starting to deteriorate, and that can often be a thing. I'm not for 1 minute saying that your dog is going deaf, but I know that one of my students' dogs, he started to get very noise sensitive, and it was because his hearing was deteriorating, and eventually he went deaf. And I know that I've known dogs than that before, so it might be worth exploring that. If not, then you can definitely start to work on desensitization. Alexa and I don't know about Siri, but Alexa does a great thing where you can say play such and such noise in the background, and like traffic sounds, and you could put it on low and start to get a meaty bone out the fridge, have the dog chew that, and build its confidence up around noises. I'm like to be quite noisy when I play with my dog. So one of my dogs, he learnt to be noise sensitive because my old dog, who was exactly when his hearing deteriorated, he eventually went more or less deaf. He got very noise sensitive. So in his youth, he wasn't fazed by noise. It was a scooter. And when he got older, he got very noise sensitive. So what he used to do was he used to then displace onto the other dog, one dog in particular, Super. So he essentially taught Super that when there was a noise, he would then redirect onto Super. And it wasn't Scooter. If you knew Scooter, Scooter wasn't an aggressive dog. He used to just be really like snarky and bark at him and be in his face. And Super was like, I don't know what's up with you. But he essentially conditioned Super to be concerned about noises. And Super hopefully will do a sport called Working Trials where there's a gun test. Concern about it, and I had to do loads of counter conditioning. Like first with the low level bang, I recorded the banging on my phone, played it in the background, played with him, and then increased the noise. And he now has the point of where I would say, if you're talking about the green, amber, and red, he's in the amber spectrum now. So he tolerates it. He doesn't like it, but he'll go, okay, fine, it's the noise. Okay, great, it's over. And then he'll look to me for good things to happen, high value reinforcement, toys, treats, etc. And that works really effectively. And it's all, I've had dogs in the past that have been very noise sensitive, and it can be really, really challenging to overcome or challenging to build their confidence. It can be with my first dog, she was very, very noise sensitive, and it was really, really hard because, it can become, because I was inexperienced and I didn't do any desensitization or counter conditioning, and essentially just threw, my hands in the air and hope for the best. It meant that she was always somewhat apprehensive because she never knew where a noise would come from. And this was when she was younger. And once I understood what counter conditioning is and desensitization and helped her, it massively improved her life and her overall well-being. All right? Hopefully that's giving you some food for thought. Bree Sargent, would you use a no reward marker? Yes, I would. So I train a no reward marker like I do a clicker, and I use a no reward marker specifically for behaviors where the dog can continue getting reinforcement. So running behaviors is a good one. If my dog runs and it makes an error when it's in motion, I'll say give the dog a no reward marker, no good, rubbish. The dog will come back to me and it will go again. Or I will block the reinforcement. That's another one. I don't have a set no reward marker. I have several that I use, all meaning the similar thing. You didn't get the reinforcement, come back to me. But no reward markers are punishers or punishment. And we need to be thinking about if the dog is receiving punishment, what is it that we would prefer them to do? And have I asked too much of them? So couple of really good ways, good ways to articulate it is, if my dog doesn't release a toy on cue or doesn't release a tug toy on cue, I would use a no reward marker to signal to the dog, I'm no longer playing with you, and I'm no longer engaging with you. So the way in which my dogs are taught that is, if they're tugging and they choose not to let go, I'll say, oops, and I'll just drop the toy and hold their collar, and they can do what they want. I don't care, but they're not having interaction with me because that's what they're really pushing for. But it just means that they're not. You could argue that the having possession of the toy is reinforcement for the dog. So me signaling to them that I'm going to be a killjoy is effective. The other instance would be like a running contact. Definitely would teach you a no reward marker, because it means that if the dog wants to run on, I can stop the dog running and have it come back to me. But no reward markers, the more and more I train dogs, is that my preference is to find a way to get the dog to be successful, and steer away from using punishment as much as I can. And if I do, it's very deliberate, it's very planned, it's minimal, and as soon as I've done it, I'm reviewing the dog's responses and watching for fallout. Okay. Punishment does not always have to be an aversive. Absolutely, Ari, anything can be a punishment. The dog will dictate what's punishment, and the dog will dictate what's reinforcement. So, for example, if my boxer was doing bite work and you got a big stick and hit him over the head, he would think that was reinforcement because he likes that energy. If you went to him and he was biting and you went, oh dear, oops, he would take that as a punishment. So the dog dictates what's reinforcement and punishment. So, a check on the lead doesn't have to be a punishment to some dogs. It might be reinforcement, depending on the dog's behaviour. But that's where we're getting a bit jargony and a bit scientific, and that's where it can sometimes be complicated. And people get confused about punishment and reinforcement. So my preference is to talk about consequences. What is the dog's consequence for doing something inappropriate? And that tends to make it clearer for people to understand. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? What are your thoughts on no reward markers? I think somebody else asked that. Hopefully I picked that up. Selena? Oh yeah, cool. You seen that? Okay. Just posting Alexa. I just Gemma. Oh, hang on. I just. Let me scroll up. Oh, I do my computer. Okay. Any other? Oh. Consequence. Perfect way jargon. Perfect way jargon blurs it so much. Perfect way jargon blurs it so much. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully, that makes sense. So yeah, consequences is generally a much more straightforward word. What's the consequence to the dog's behaviour? Was the consequence something that's likely to cause it to happen again? Or was the consequence something that's going to stop the dog happening again? And if the consequence is, for me, if it's painful, uncomfortable, has a fallout, I'm going to be thinking I'm going to steer away from using it. If the consequence is likely to cause the dog to repeat the behaviour and encourage it to repeat the behaviour, then yes, I'm absolutely going to be steering towards that way. But the thing to be say is I don't have any judgment for people that choose to train differently from me. This is just the way in which I choose to train my dogs. It doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong. It's what I feel comfortable with and what works for me and creates the picture and the relationship that I want to have for my dogs. So hopefully that has answered your questions. I know that punishment is something that certainly for trainers that use reinforcement is something that isn't talked about enough and candidly enough. So those that look to us for guidance about, well, what do I do if my dog does? And you can fill in the blank. It doesn't matter whether it's sports related or behavioural related or behavioural. There's that ambiguous bit because nobody wants to actually talk about it in the sense that, and have an ownership of it and saying, yes, I use punishment and this is exactly how I use it. My good friend Denise Fenzi has done some really great talks on, I think she's doing them on Instagram Live, about punishment, showing live sessions with her young dog Dice, showing how a reinforcement-based dog trainer uses or punishes her dog in a way that morally and ethically sits with her and sits comfortably with her. And, in truth, I think that there is always, we all have consequences to our actions. If you turn up late for work, there's a consequence to your actions. If you, if you speed in your vehicle, there's a consequence to your actions. If you, etc., etc. There's loads of instances where we have consequences. We have to be mindful of, is the consequence effective? Does it actually work? So if you're talking about speeding, does receiving a speeding ticket actually change your behaviour permanently? Does it stop you? Probably not for most of us. What we do is we alter our behaviour, but we don't stop speeding. So, you could articulate that punishment, because we've all been punished, isn't effective in that instance. Now, if the consequence was so severe, it might have an effect. So if you were, when you sped in your vehicle and you went over the mark, if you, were, the great analogy that Susan Garrett talks about is, with speeding is, let's just say that the consequence was somebody went to the boot of your car and shot your dog. You would probably never ever speed again, but imagine the fallout. Imagine the fallout that you would feel towards law enforcement, towards blue sirens, towards vehicles pulling up behind you, and so forth and so forth and so forth. So whilst punishment might be have the desired result and the consequence that has been implemented, we need to be thinking about the fallout. And what would be the better course of action? Is there a way in which we could educate our dog in how we want them to behave? All right. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought. I'm just going to make sure that there's no questions that I have missed out. If anybody wants to ask a question about punishment, and any questions about, and hopefully this has been insightful and helpful to people, and give you more clarity. And if we, rather than using the words punishment and reinforcement, which can absolutely get a little bit grey, because the day-to-day use of those words in terms of the scientific definition can often become confusing. If we talk about consequences, the consequence that my dog has probably articulates it a little bit clearer to people. And the consequences that I, as a dog trainer, am happy to use versus other people, and the consequences for good behavior and education. So we refer to it as consequences and education. Hopefully that will be clearer to people. All right. So I'm going to love you and leave you, everybody. Hopefully that's been insightful and interesting. This is the type of thing that I do on the Labeling Reactivity course. So if you have a dog that you believe has reactivity issues, and I phrase it as such because I don't think we should be thinking of dogs like that, join the group. I do regular lives like this. The other experts also do lives on the group and contribute additional content. There's also been interviews with other people from around the world that have hands-on experiences with dogs that are that have been deemed reactive. Dave Munnings was a contributor, championship level agility competitor who talks about his experiences with his dog Boost, who was a rehome rescue dog who had reactivity and dog aggression issues. And Suzanne Jaffa, another very good friend of mine, with her Australian Shepherd D, who was a 5-month-old rescue rehome who'd had a bite history, who went on to become an obedience champion, and she talks about how she did that. We've also had input from a dietitian talking about nutrition and the effect on behaviour. My good friend Hannah Capon talking about pain and how that relates to behaviour, and it's just a really, really great group with the greater thing from it is the supportive community that has evolved since the group has been in fruition. So people with similar issues sharing their journey together, and also supporting each other on the good days and the bad days, which I think is so powerful and why the group is working out amazingly well, surpassed even my expectations. So I will share something you asked about the link to the group. I'll post the link to the group. And if you have any other questions about punishment, or there's something else that you'd like some input or thoughts on, by all means, just post on my Facebook wall, tag me in it, and I will pick it up. All right, everybody, thank you for joining this Friday afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the sunny outside. So I'm going to go and train my dogs and walk my dogs, and take care and look after yourselves.